The morning was cloaked in gray, shrouded by a dense veil of fog that seemed to swallow everything in its path. The air was biting cold, piercing through layers of clothing, and the sound of the wind rustling through the trees carried an almost mournful whisper. An empty road stretched ahead, winding through the desolate landscape, its edges scattered with damp leaves and small puddles left by the relentless rain of the previous night. By the roadside stood a solitary figure, solemn and motionless, as though abandoned by time itself. It was a horse. Gaunt, with ribs visible beneath a coat dulled by mud and grime, the animal seemed more a ghost than a living creature. Its mane hung in tangled strands, draped like a neglected veil, partially hiding a face marked by small wounds and wear. But it was the eyes that told the most haunting story. Large and deep brown, they spoke of a sorrow that transcended exhaustion, carrying the weight of a mystery, a bond severed but not forgotten. There was something in that gaze, an ache, a longing, that made the horse's stillness feel almost sacred. The horse stood frozen, as if anchored to the ground by unseen forces. Its head hung low, but its eyes remained fixed on a curve in the road ahead, where the asphalt disappeared into the fog. Cars sped past, their tires splashing water from nearby puddles, but the horse did not flinch. Some drivers slowed, curiosity tugging at them as they glanced at the forlorn figure, yet none stopped. The world kept moving, but the horse did not. It was as though nothing else mattered except whatever it was waiting for. The distant sound of honking came and went, faint echoes of a world that had left this place behind. Every time headlights pierced through the fog and bathed the horse in light, it lifted its head slightly, as if pulled by the faint thread of hope. But as quickly as it stirred, the moment passed, and it sank back into its motionless vigil. The ground beneath the horse told its own story. Hoofprints circled the muddy earth in small, aimless loops, a silent testament to restless pacing during the long, cold nights. Now, however, it was as though the horse had surrendered to the stillness, caught in a timeless pause, tethered to a hope no one else could understand. 3 days. It had been 3 days since the horse was first spotted in this exact spot, at the same time of day, in the same silent stance. The icy dawns and long, lonely nights had passed unbroken, yet the horse endured, unmoving. And then, on this gray morning, something finally shifted. The low rumble of an engine echoed in the distance. A truck emerged, its headlights cutting through the mist, illuminating the horse's fragile silhouette once more. But this time, the vehicle slowed. It came to a stop. The truck door creaked open, and a man stepped out, pulling his jacket tight against the biting wind. His eyes locked onto the horse, taking in its gaunt frame, the dirt-caked coat, the weariness etched into every line of its body. The horse, for the first time, moved. Slowly, it turned its head and fixed its gaze on the stranger. Its eyes, deep and unrelenting, seemed to carry the weight of the world, filled with a quiet plea, a story too heavy to tell. Something in that gaze struck the man to his core. In that moment, he knew he was standing before something far greater than a lost animal. He was in the presence of a mystery, a bond, a love that refused to let go. Mike was a man of the road. For over 2 decades, his truck had been his home, and the highway his closest companion. He'd seen it all, violent storms that threatened to rip the sky apart, sunrises that painted the horizon in breathtaking hues, and tragedies that left invisible scars. But that morning, something about the lone horse by the roadside made him press the brakes. The engine of his truck growled as it slowed to a stop, the sound fading into the stillness of the foggy dawn. Mike sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the figure through the windshield. He couldn't explain it, but there was something magnetic about the way the horse stood, silent and motionless, against the backdrop of the misty road. Finally, he pushed open the door, the chill in the air hitting him like a cold blade. The wind tugged at his jacket, but he barely noticed. He stepped out cautiously, his boots crunching against the gravel, and walked toward the horse. As he got closer, he could feel its eyes on him, deep, soulful eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 untold stories. The horse didn't flinch. It didn't run. It just stood there, watching him. Mike felt a strange ache in his chest. There was no fear in the animal's gaze, but something deeper, exhaustion, and an emptiness so profound it seemed to echo in the stillness around them. "What are you doing out here, buddy?" Mike asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to disturb the fragile connection forming between them. The horse didn't answer, how could it, but there was something in its posture, a subtle tilt of its head, that almost felt like a response. Mike stopped a few feet away, taking in the details. The horse was painfully thin, its ribs casting shadows under a coat that was muddied and worn. Small cuts marked its flanks, likely from branches or barbed wire. Its hooves were cracked and caked with dried mud, a clear sign of a long, grueling journey. Yet, despite its frailty, there was an undeniable nobility in the way it held itself. Even in its broken state, the horse exuded a quiet dignity that demanded respect. Mike followed the horse's gaze, noticing how it stayed fixed on the curve of the road ahead, where the asphalt disappeared into the fog. "You're waiting for someone, aren't you?" he murmured, his voice heavy with curiosity and an unease he couldn't quite place. The horse didn't move, but a faint, almost inaudible whinny escaped its nostrils, a sound so soft it felt like a sigh. Mike felt a lump form in his throat. He turned back to his truck and grabbed a water bottle from the console. As he approached again, the horse shifted slightly, its head lifting just a fraction. "Here you go, pal. You've gotta be thirsty," Mike said, crouching down and holding the bottle out at arm's length. For a moment, the horse hesitated. Its dark eyes studied him, weighing whether this man could be trusted. Finally, it took a cautious step forward, its movements slow and deliberate, before lowering its head to drink. The way it drank, quickly, desperately, told Mike that it had been a long time since the animal had known kindness. While the horse drank, Mike's eyes drifted to the ground. That's when he noticed the marks. Human footprints and tire tracks, faint but still visible in the soft dirt, surrounded the spot where the horse stood. His brow furrowed as he pieced together the scene. "Someone's been here," he muttered under his breath, his voice tinged with a mix of confusion and concern. He traced the tracks with his gaze, seeing how they ended right where the horse was now. Mike stood up, his heart heavy with questions. He looked at the horse again, now calmer, but still staring at the same bend in the road, as if nothing else existed. "There's a story here, isn't there?" he said quietly, almost to himself. "Something you can't leave behind." For the first time in years, Mike felt the weight of an unexplainable responsibility settle on his shoulders. Every instinct told him to get back in the truck and keep moving, he had places to be. But something stronger kept him rooted to the spot. This wasn't just a lost horse. It was a living mystery, a silent plea, and Mike couldn't ignore it. Mike couldn't shake the weight of the horse's silent plea. He had seen stray animals before, but this was different. This wasn't just a creature in need of help, This was a soul bound to something it couldn't let go of. He decided then and there that he wouldn't leave the horse behind. The challenge began when Mike tried to coax the horse into the back of his truck. He'd parked as close as he could to the roadside, creating a makeshift ramp with a wooden plank he found in the truck bed. "Come on, buddy. Let's get you somewhere safe," Mike murmured, holding his hand out in a gesture of trust. The horse, now reluctantly named Buddy in Mike's mind, didn't move. It stood there, frozen, staring back at the curve in the road with an intensity that made Mike's chest tighten. He took a step closer, speaking softly. "I promise, I'll take care of you. You don't have to wait here anymore." Buddy finally shifted, his hooves pressing into the dirt, but it wasn't a step toward Mike. Instead, he turned his head back to the road, releasing a deep sigh through his nostrils. It was a sound filled with longing, as if the horse was saying goodbye to something or someone. It took nearly an hour of gentle coaxing, with Mike patiently offering soft words and strokes along Buddy's tangled mane, but the horse finally relented. As he walked up the ramp into the truck, his steps were slow and hesitant, each one weighted with reluctance. Mike couldn't shake the feeling that Buddy believed he was leaving behind something he would never see again. "That's it, good boy," Mike whispered, securing the horse gently with ropes. "Don't worry. I've got you now." The drive to the nearby sanctuary was silent except for the occasional soft snort from Buddy. Mike glanced in his rearview mirror, watching the horse as it stood in the truck bed, its head low and its body swaying slightly with the motion of the vehicle. When they arrived, Mike was greeted by Tom, an old friend who ran a small rescue sanctuary on the outskirts of town. Tom was a wiry man with weathered hands and a kind demeanor, someone who had dedicated his life to helping animals no one else cared about. "What do we have here?" Tom asked, eyeing the horse as it stepped gingerly out of the truck. "Found him by the roadside. Looks like he's been there a while. He's in bad shape, but there's something about him," Mike trailed off, unsure how to articulate the strange pull he felt from the animal. Tom nodded, as if he understood without needing further explanation. "Let's take a look at him." In the examination barn, Buddy stood quietly, his large eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. As Tom began inspecting him, he frowned, his hands pausing as they ran over the horse's neck. "Wait a second. There's something here," Tom said, pushing back the matted mane to reveal a faint marking beneath the grime. It was a branding mark, old and nearly faded, but still recognizable. "This is from a ranch not far from here," Tom said, his brow furrowing. "But that place has been abandoned for years. Something doesn't add up." Mike's curiosity deepened. "What do you mean?" Tom stepped back, crossing his arms as he explained. "The ranch belonged to a man named Sam Whitaker. He died in a car accident about 5 years ago. The property's been empty ever since. But this horse, he must have been Sam's." Mike felt a chill creep up his spine. "Where did Sam die?" Tom hesitated before answering. "On that stretch of road where you found this horse." Mike's heart sank. It couldn't be a coincidence. The horse had been waiting, day after day, in the very spot where its owner had lost his life. As he pieced it together, Mike began to understand. Buddy wasn't just a stray, he was mourning. The loyalty etched into his every action now made sense. This horse had lost not just a caretaker, but a companion. Tom sighed, his voice soft. "Horses don't forget, Mike. They remember the people who care for them." Looks like this one's been holding onto something no one else could see. Mike looked at Buddy, who was now standing calmly in the barn, his eyes still carrying that quiet, unyielding sorrow. "We've got to help him," Mike said firmly. "He's been through enough. I don't care how long it takes, I'm not letting him keep waiting for someone who's never coming back." Buddy's story wasn't just about loss. It was about an unbreakable bond, one that even death hadn't severed. Mike knew then that this horse wasn't just a rescue. He was a testament to the kind of love that endures, even in the face of the unimaginable. Sam Whitaker had lived a life carved by loss. Years earlier, an unforgiving fire had consumed his home, taking with it his wife and 2 young children. From that moment on, Sam became a shadow of the man he once was, wandering through life with an emptiness that nothing could fill. He lived in solitude, keeping to himself, until one fateful day when he found a young, skittish horse wandering near his property. The horse was thin, its coat dull, and its spirit broken, much like Sam himself. But there was something in the animal's eyes that struck him deeply, something he couldn't ignore. He took the horse in, named him Buddy, and nursed him back to health. Slowly, a bond grew between them, a silent companionship forged in mutual understanding. Buddy wasn't just a horse to Sam, he was a lifeline. The horse became his reason to wake up each day, to tend to the fields, to keep moving forward despite the grief that threatened to consume him. Sam spoke to Buddy as though he were an old friend, sharing stories of the family he'd lost, dreams he'd buried, and plans for a future he wasn't sure he still believed in. But life wasn't kind to Sam. The farm, the last remnant of his old life, began to slip through his fingers as debts mounted. Eventually, he lost it all. With nowhere left to turn, Sam made a decision: he would leave everything behind and start fresh in a new town. On a cold, rainy night, he packed his few remaining belongings into an old truck and loaded Buddy into the back. The road was dark, shrouded in mist, and the rain turned the pavement into a slick, dangerous surface. Sam drove cautiously, but the old truck was unreliable, and its brakes had seen better days. As he approached a sharp curve on the winding road, the tires lost their grip. The truck skidded uncontrollably, veering off the asphalt and tumbling down an embankment. The crash was catastrophic. Sam was killed instantly, the impact leaving no chance for survival. Buddy, thrown from the truck's bed, survived with minor injuries but was left disoriented and terrified. Witnesses later said they saw a horse running down the road that night, its movements frantic, as though searching for something or someone. Days later, Buddy was spotted again, standing at the very site of the crash. He remained there, staring down the road, waiting. Mike learned this story in fragments, piecing it together from conversations with locals as he tried to uncover the truth about Buddy's past. The final piece came from an elderly woman who lived near the curve where the accident had happened. She remembered the crash vividly, but what haunted her most was the horse that returned, time and time again. He came back often, she said, her voice soft and tremulous, as though she was recalling a ghost. He'd stand there for hours, looking at the road. Sometimes he'd whinny, like he was calling for Sam. Mike's chest tightened as he listened. "You think he was waiting for him?" he asked, already knowing the answer. The woman nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Horses don't forget, you know. When they love someone, they hold on. He was waiting for Sam to come back." The weight of her words settled over Mike like a heavy blanket. Buddy's story wasn't just about loss, it was about unwavering loyalty. For days, maybe weeks, Buddy had waited at the site of the accident, refusing to leave, unable to accept that the man he loved was gone forever. Later that day, Mike returned to the sanctuary where Buddy was being cared for. As he entered the barn, he found the horse standing still, his head low but his eyes distant, as though he was still staring down that stretch of road. Mike approached slowly, placing a hand on Buddy's neck and whispering softly, "He's not coming back, Buddy. But you don't have to wait anymore. You've done enough." Buddy exhaled a deep breath, a sound that felt like both a sigh and a release. Mike didn't know if the horse understood his words, but he knew Buddy could feel the love and reassurance behind them. The bond Buddy shared with Sam Whitaker was something words could barely capture. It was a connection forged in shared pain, trust, and love, a connection so strong that not even death had broken it. Mike vowed to honor that bond, to ensure that Buddy's wait had not been in vain. Buddy's story was no longer just about loss. It was about the resilience of love, the kind that persists even when all else is gone. Mike, now part of that story, would make sure it was never forgotten. At the sanctuary, Buddy began to recover. His once gaunt frame slowly filled out, his ribs no longer protruding like sharp ridges beneath his coat. His mane, once tangled and dirty, regained its soft, flowing luster as the caregivers brushed it daily. But no amount of physical care could mend what was broken inside him. Though his body healed, Buddy's soul seemed tethered to an invisible thread, one that stretched back to the curve in the road where his world had unraveled. Each day, as the other horses grazed peacefully or napped in the shade, Buddy would wander to the edge of the pasture. He'd stand there, motionless, staring at the horizon. His ears would twitch at the faint hum of passing cars, and his head would lift, as if straining to hear a sound that never came, the rumble of Sam's truck. Mike watched this routine with a heavy heart. He spent hours sitting with Buddy, stroking his neck and talking to him in soft, comforting tones. "You're safe now, boy," he'd say. "You don't have to keep looking. You don't have to wait anymore." But Buddy didn't stop. His vigil continued, day after day, and Mike couldn't shake the feeling that the horse wasn't just waiting, he was grieving. It was on one of these quiet evenings, with the sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold, that Mike made his decision. He couldn't let Buddy carry this burden alone. If Buddy needed closure, Mike would help him find it. The next morning, Mike loaded Buddy into the trailer. This time, the horse walked in willingly, as if he understood that this journey was different. Mike drove slowly, the road stretching out before him in familiar twists and turns. His hands gripped the wheel tightly as he approached the curve where everything had changed for Buddy and Sam. Mike parked the truck and led Buddy out of the trailer. The horse stepped onto the soft earth with a cautious grace, his nostrils flaring as he took in the air. It was as if he recognized the place. At the site of the crash, Mike had erected a simple memorial, a wooden cross, weathered but sturdy, planted firmly in the ground. Beside it, he had placed a small plaque that read, "In memory of Sam Whitaker, a loyal man, loved by all, and never forgotten." Buddy stood before the cross, his ears pricked forward, his gaze fixed on the humble tribute. The world seemed to hold its breath. The gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze was the only sound, and even that felt reverent. For long minutes, Buddy didn't move. He simply stood there, his body still but his soul heavy with unspoken emotion. Then, as if compelled by a force only he could feel, he lowered his head toward the cross. A soft, low whinny escaped him, a sound so quiet, so full of sorrow, that it seemed to carry the weight of every moment Buddy had spent waiting, every unanswered question, every lingering memory of Sam. Mike felt his throat tighten, his own emotions threatening to spill over. He placed a hand on Buddy's neck, his touch light but steady. "He's not here anymore, Buddy," Mike whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "But he never really left you." Buddy exhaled deeply, a sound that felt almost like a release. His head stayed low, his posture calm but somber, as if he were saying a final goodbye to the man he had loved so deeply. Mike stayed by his side, letting the horse take his time. He didn't rush him, he couldn't. This moment belonged to Buddy, and Mike was merely there to bear witness. When Buddy finally lifted his head, there was something different in his eyes. The sorrow hadn't disappeared, it never would, but there was a quiet acceptance there, a faint glimmer of peace that hadn't been present before. Mike led Buddy back to the trailer, the two walking side by side in the fading light of the evening. "You're going to be okay now," Mike said softly. "And I promise, I'll take care of you. You're not alone anymore." As they drove away, the memorial stood tall against the setting sun, a silent testament to a bond that even death couldn't sever. For the first time, Buddy didn't turn his head to look back at the curve in the road. Instead, he stood quietly, his gaze forward, as if he was finally ready to step into a new chapter. And in that moment, Mike knew that Buddy's wait was over, and so was his grief. Mike couldn't bring himself to leave Buddy behind. The bond the horse had shared with Sam Whitaker was too profound, too sacred, to let fade away in isolation. So, Mike made a choice that felt inevitable. He brought Buddy to his own farm, a quiet place surrounded by rolling green pastures and a sky that seemed to stretch forever. There, Buddy began a new chapter. He grazed in the sun-dappled fields, his coat growing sleek and healthy, his muscles regaining their strength. Yet, despite the warmth of this new home, there was something in Buddy's eyes that never quite changed, a lingering melancholy, a silent reflection of the memories he carried deep within him. Mike often watched him from the porch, the horse's silhouette standing against the golden hues of the setting sun. Sometimes Buddy would lift his head and gaze at the horizon, his ears flicking as if he could still hear the faint echo of Sam's voice, calling him home. It wasn't sadness anymore, but a quiet reverence, a tribute to the man who had given him everything. Buddy's story wasn't just about loss, it was about a love so enduring that not even death could break its hold. The bond he and Sam shared was a testament to the power of loyalty, the kind that transcends words and reason. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and painted the world in fiery orange, Mike stood by the fence, watching Buddy gallop across the field. The horse moved with grace, his mane flowing like a banner of resilience. Mike felt his chest tighten, a mix of admiration and awe welling up within him. "Animals don't know how to give up," Mike murmured, his voice filled with emotion. "They wait. They believe. And they teach us what loyalty really means." For a moment, he let the words hang in the air, the wind carrying them away into the quiet expanse of the evening. Then, as Buddy slowed to a steady trot and glanced in Mike's direction, as if acknowledging his presence, Mike added softly, "May we always be worthy of that trust. Always." Buddy's story, like Sam's, would never be forgotten. It was etched into the land, into the hearts of those who heard it, and most of all, into the soul of a man who had witnessed the unbreakable bond between a horse and his person. And as the sun finally disappeared behind the horizon, Mike turned away, his heart fuller than it had been in years, knowing he had done his part to honor that bond.